Welcome. You are listening to Caregiving Secrets with Deborah Greenhut. If you are a family caregiver or expect to be one, and you want to maintain your well-being while caring, then you are in the right place. I am your host, Deborah Greenhut, speaker, author, and rational caregiver advocate. I'm a family caregiving veteran, bringing you survival secrets and experiences from experts who share the goal of doing less by managing more. We need to invent and reinvent family care, and together we're going to do it. My big idea is rational caregiving, and my motto is, let your brain lead your heart. Please share yours in the comments. Caregiving Secrets, because friends don't let friends be caregivers alone. Let's do this. Welcome to the Caregiving Secret. I'm especially delighted today because my guest is Dr. Matthew Campbell, who's a licensed psychologist and co-author with Joshua Semko of Our Primal Five, a science-based practical approach to self-care built around sleep, sunlight, movement, social connection, and consumption. He helps people create real change through simple, repeatable behaviors that support mental and physical health. Now, I'm so pleased to have you here with me, Matthew, because there is so much that we need to talk about here that will help caregivers. So let's get right to the share giving part of the
Sounds
evening.
great.
I want to welcome you, so you could say hello to our audience.
Yes, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Glad to have you. So I in the incredible mix of topics that we could talk about, I thought I'd start by asking you a little bit about your experience either as a caregiver or with caregivers, because I think there's a little bit of both there.
There is, yes. So I did a lot of work, especially early on, in working with Alzheimer's dementia caregivers. In graduate school, I had a wonderful mentor, Joanna Quinn, and I had a lot of experience there when I was working at the VA in San Antonio. I also did a good bit of work with caregivers. And early, as I said, professionally, I did a lot of geriatric work and such. And then, as you mentioned, with my dad, also, trying to help along with my siblings, my sisters and brother. And now we're trying to help my mom, but don't tell her that because, she's an
Sometimes,
independent lady.
sometimes we don't like to know. That's true.
Right.
I hope I'm kind to my children when it comes to that. So as a caregiver and a person who works with caregivers and whose formulas really apply to the caregiving situation, which is often more of a struggle than we realize it's going to be when we first start it. What is the one thing you think that caregivers should know about protecting their own health and their own situation?
I think that certainly with caregivers, I think that caregivers just as a general statement are so others oriented and they're so oriented to providing the care and it's so valuable and important and it's so directed outward. And I think that there is such a tendency to become depleted in terms of energy and that's my passion is really working on these things that we know we are made to do, and really attending to these things to help, certainly caregivers, people, in other situations to try to take care of these things, um, and be mindful of them, to remember that they have needs too, and not just to as a provider.
Yeah. Did you feel that too when you were being a caregiver or as a caregiver now for your mom? Do you feel that invisibility?
Well, I think that those times when I'm I'm trying to help others, and whether it's my parents or otherwise, it feels like that's our role. And we need to be hyper focused on that. And it is very, very easy to get locked into that, being that that is our job, so to speak, our role at that time, and not wanting to miss something, and that heightened alertness. And I think it's perhaps even natural to lose sight of these things.
Yeah, I guess that's a big part of the problem when it becomes too difficult to follow through on the things that you promised yourself to do. How do you get your visibility back? How do you step back in and say, I'm here and I have needs myself?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that we are made for structure. And we are made from trying to have some consistency as best we're able, so that we need to, so it's less about remembering it and more about following with our schedule, our pattern, and these kind of things. And the better we can do it, creating that structure. Now, understandably, some situations are easier, that is easier to do than others, for certain. But I do think that the more that we can create that structure, the less that we have to remind ourselves and such. It becomes more of a routine rather than an exception.
Yeah, so it sounds like if you are responding to situations, and by that I mean thinking about how you're going to respond because you have that structure rather than reacting and
Right.
just jumping on every task that comes up, you probably are going to fare better. Now, oh, go ahead.
No, and I really, that aspect of, you know, with caregivers and with people in general, I think often we don't notice it until we are depleted. And so that's another part of structure that can help us so that we don't get to that place. But caregivers are uniquely vulnerable to this. We know the research, we know both physically and emotionally the drain that can occur for caregivers. And so, perhaps caregivers, more than most, need to be very aware of these energy giving, these, kind of emotionally calming techniques.
Yeah, I think those as we get around to talking about them are going to be very helpful. When we first met, you shared a very powerful moment from a caregiver support group where someone asked about denying her mother ice cream. Do you remember that story?
I do very well, very well. I had the opportunity to speak with a local Alzheimer's support group. As I mentioned, Dr. Quinn, she has had a group for over 30 years here in Oxford, Mississippi. And she invited me to speak. And in the midst of going over these self-care, these replenishment approaches and exercises and techniques, I was describing one of them that I presume we'll discuss, which is consumption. And I was talking about, trying our best, not perfection, but trying our best to consume healthy, natural foods and such. And so this, wonderful lady, woman raises her hand, and she has a question. And her question was, well, I believe it was her father. And she said, my father loves ice cream. And I don't know how much time he left. And I mean, should I, keep him from this thing that he enjoys so much? And that's when I had to remind her I wasn't talking about her father. I was talking about her. And that, in a nutshell, is what happens so often with caregivers, is that when we're talking about health and advice and suggestions and encouragement, they're not thinking of it through, for me, they're thinking about it for who they're providing care for. And And it was and that was really shown by when I said that to her, it was you could see she was trying to register something that was so different than what she normally does.
Yeah, it's almost as if there has been an erasure, a self-erasure maybe, and it's hard to come
Right,
back onto the screen once you've done that to yourself. Not that
right.
not that she was alone responsible for that. Often other systems help to or conspire to make us invisible, but a really big
Right.
challenge. Now, you represented the Primal Five as tools that can help caregivers to survive. Could you sketch out the big picture of the Primal Five for us now?
Yes. So, our Primal Five, it is about trying to find those that or attend to those things that we as humans were made to do. And so when we think about these things and why it's so important now, more than ever to be mindful of these and attend to and take care of, is that we live in a time that's quite different than our ancestors. And our ancestors, these things like getting sunlight, making sure we're taking care of our sleep, moving our bodies, having meaningful connection with others, taking in both physically and mentally things that come from this earth. Um, and being really intentional with what we consume. Those are things that our ancestors, they didn't have to think about. That's what they did to survive. But for us, we live in this world with so many other choices, so many easy buttons, so many things that can get in our way of taking care of these. Now, the thing is, though, is that even though we live in this technological age, our bodies are still the same. Our needs are still the same, but we live in a time we have to be so intentional with these things. And so they may be simple, but we struggle with them. We struggle with them, and the numbers are really really overwhelming. Particularly here in the States, the numbers in terms of our diet and our and getting out and getting moving and being connected. And we have a loneliness epidemic, and we talk about caregivers. And that is something that caregivers are really susceptible to, given, that they're this, for some people, this 24-hour job and work that they're doing and how easily they can get in that place of loneliness. And so my this our Primal Five approach is about let's be intentional, let's be structured, and let's do it in a way that's not extreme. Consistency over intensity is that, we don't need to go to extremes with these things. We don't need to be perfect, but we do need to attend to them. We do need to be mindful of those needs.
Yeah, I think that leads me nicely to my next question, which is which you mentioned in passing up there about it being 24/7 and kind of lonely. Caregiving sometimes quietly becomes a solo labor. In the beginning, I think sometimes you can get some people to help you, but with conditions, particularly Alzheimer's, the friends tend to fade away, and some of the family members are not up to the task either. So, um, what is a caregiver supposed to do? How can they continue to share that labor or figure out how to incorporate more people in there so neither they nor the person they're caring for are isolated like that?
Well, I obviously this is it's gonna vary. It's gonna depend on specific circumstances, where someone lives, um, how long they've lived in a place, and how many connections they've had. There are going to be a number of things that are um, that this is going to depend on, and with that, we're going to need to figure out, like, for example, figure out what works. Um, we were talking about that support group that I was speaking with, and one woman who provides care for her mother, she, she is new to a town. She moved to this town. I mean, I live in Mississippi. I mean, there aren't a lot of urban areas in Mississippi. And so she had moved somewhere. I wouldn't call it super rural, but it's new to her.
Mhm.
And so she didn't have that support system present. And so for her, this group was a big part of it. And they did a Zoom approach. And so she was able to get and experience, that support from people that care. And sometimes people can give helpful advice. A lot of times it's just great to be heard. It's just great for a group of people. Yeah, every problem can't be solved. But it goes a long way to have that connection, to experience that care. So, as I said, as I was mentioning, it would be lovely if we could have it perfectly. It would be lovely if we could have a meaningful interaction each day. That would be wonderful. But it's about trying to adapt to our situation. Similarly, it would be wonderful to have that in person. And so we could, that would be the ideal. That's really what we're going for. And if we can, fantastic. But sometimes we can't. And so, if it's online that we need to do it, well then, we gotta do what we gotta do. But we have to, again, be mindful, recognize that need, and really find that way. And also not put restrictions, excessive restrictions on ourselves. Like I can't take that time. There are generally going to be things that we can do to give ourselves, some time, to fit in, these parts of it. And further, if someone is at that place where they're overwhelmed, it takes a little bit more effort because, things like if I'm feeling overwhelmed, if I'm feeling that sadness, sometimes that makes initiating these things more difficult. And so it's just, that intention, realizing the power. I've had people I've worked with who when I listened to their experiences and their story, it was just overwhelming. And I've had some people who simply having that connection, having that group, having that was in and of itself lifted them, lifted them honestly more than I would have thought. It was wonderful.
Hmm. Yeah, most of the time, the person who's doing it is a pretty resilient person, or they wouldn't be there in the first place. So I,
Sure.
I know I'm kind of a lone ranger, so it was difficult for me to seek help from others. But I did find I needed to be seen. I needed for people to know what I was doing in ways that I had not experienced in myself before. There was something so large and looming about the experience and all the emotions that were coming with it. It's not like working on a paper for school, which I could always be very intense about. It is
Right.
intense, but in a very different way. And I needed more people in that story. Um,
I love you saying that because I think that that is also one of the roadblocks for us for taking care of ourselves. And it's one of the things that makes it so challenging is that any of these things, any of these five areas that I talk about, they're also challenging because we can get away with not attending to them for a certain amount of time. And And so sometimes we minimize how important they are. When we think of I'm a lone ranger, I do this on my own, and we can get away with it for a while. It's gonna catch up with us. I mean, it's just the acceptance that we are humans, these are human needs, and I need to be mindful that I can't keep the superwoman, the superman approach because we're just not made for it. And we don't need to prove that we can do that. And we need, to make sure sometimes we're so depleted that becomes our normal.
Yeah.
and we don't even realize what we're missing because all we have to compare to is ourselves. And if I'm accustomed to feeling this way, well, then I may not think, boy, that would be helpful, or, that's a need I have that's not being met because this is what I know. And again, we're here to remind people.
Yeah, it's a kind of an interesting paradox. I know that sometimes we like to talk about primal human beings as having to be gluttons because they had to take advantage of supplies that were around
Sure.
them at the time. And it seems that sometimes caregivers get into that same kind of rut too, but they are more the self-depriving than a
Right.
primal person might have been. So we put ourselves on a connection diet, and that's not a very good thing to do if it means
Right.
deprivation there. So I like what
That's
you
a
said
great
about
point.
that.
That's a
Yeah.
really neat way to look at it. You talk about a glutton. It's like, when those opportunities arise, it's making sure others get theirs rather than we're replenished during those times. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess food might be the exception, probably. Often that's the company that a caregiver has is food.
Right.
Um, and that becomes a substitute for the connection. Easier to grab another donut than to call someone and say, I need to talk right
Right.
now. So it seems like it doesn't take up so much time, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, there's a kind of myth of infinite capacity that goes along with it, and in that families often assume that one child or another has that infinite capacity to be a caregiver. This is what they intuit about their sister or brother or another relative, and they try to go along with that or to perpetuate that. And I know that in my own experience, people said things like, I don't know how you do it. Or even a faith gesture, you're doing the Lord's work, and so on. And those things can sound supportive, but sometimes they trap people into doing more, I think. So, how would you recommend that caregivers try to set limits without being crushed by guilt or by other people's expectations of them?
Easier said than done.
Oh, Matt.
Well, it's easier said than done because we would all like for there to be this approach that just solves it, right? And that we don't have to deal with discomfort and pain with. We would love that. We would love for other people to say, you know what, Deborah, you are doing too much. But instead, they'll often say, boy, you are just selfless, right? And so, unfortunately, that part where we have to initiate it, we have to ask, we have to set limits. That's not comfortable. And that's the challenge is that it's really not comfortable. And but we do not, just being aware that we don't want to get to that place that either we become completely overwhelmed and depleted, or, the other thing that can happen, I don't know if you've had this experience, but the other thing that can happen is we get so worn down. And at first, it feels good to hear these nice things about, oh, you are selfless. You are a saint. You're earning points, these kind of things. And it can feel good. And then over time, it feels less good. But what can happen is we wait and we wait and we wait, and then we can pop. Then we can say, I cannot believe you're not helping at all. I've been doing all this. And it's just like we have held this in so long that there's got to be a release. There's got to be a release of that energy and that hurt and that exhaustion. And so coming back to your original question and my disappointing response that I wish there were an easy way. But it does take that recognition is that this people may not be responsive or receptive or like what I'm about to say. But it needs to be said. I need to be recognized in terms of I have things I need. And the other beauty that can happen in bringing up the need for help is that it not only puts us in the room in terms of people considering us, but it also creates some accountability for others because it's being brought up, and if they don't help, they're making an active choice not to help. And I think that none of us are comfortable, or not many of us are comfortable with that. And I think it's important to bring that forth. It's the truth. We're not manipulative. We're just telling the truth. And so I do think so. But like so many things, there's that acceptance that, yeah, it's probably going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be uncomfortable to set this limit. But that's part of it. That doesn't mean I'm doing something wrong. That doesn't mean there's something the matter. It's just I'm maybe saying something someone doesn't want to hear.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're being assertive, you have the right to ask for a break here and there, or
Yes.
some change in conditions if they're overwhelming for you. And getting praise in return instead of a change is not really satisfactory. That's not going to make it work for the caregiver, especially if we want to have enough caregivers to go around. I read a statistic that I guess it was 50 years ago, we might have had 7 or 8 people who could be waiting in the wings to be caregivers, whereas by 2030, there are only going to be 3 people as families are shrinking and fewer and moving far away from one another. It's
Right.
going to be more difficult to find those people. So I think we do have to find some answers to make this a bearable job. Otherwise, the numbers will shrink a lot faster.
Yes.
We had mentioned faith a few minutes ago, and I've noticed that sometimes that is a boon to the situation, that people's faith can help them get through on both sides of the caregiving equation, whether being cared for or being the carer. That faith can help to see you through difficult circumstances. But what
Mhm.
about the other side of that, when it is used to justify self-sacrifice? How might we handle that?
Well, we gotta watch out for it. I mean, it's the thing is we know that as beautiful as faith can be, there's nothing in this world in terms of as humans that is only going to be that there's only the possibility of it being either positive or negative. There are very few things that can only be one or the other. We can drink too much water. It's things are, it can be used in any number of ways. And so, my dissertation was on religious coping in caregivers. And those who view a compassionate, loving God, who, is not punitive and isn't punishing them and these kind of things do benefit, for sure. I guess that's pretty, logical. But I do think, though, that we need to watch out for that aspect of that is that right? Let's ask a question. Whatever faith I may have, whatever system of faith, or perhaps it's not even a system, it's a spirituality, but would that, whether it is God, whether it is any number of things, would they want me to be absolutely exhausted and depleted? Does that sound right? Is the goal for my immune system to be depleted? Is it my emotional reserves? Is that really it? Um, I have a hard time believing that would be the case. And so when we hear it in ourselves, hear it in others, I think it's really important. I think it's a very important thing to question. Well, would God want this for me? I mean, would God want, for someone to be punished? Now, that's not to say that we don't do things that, wouldn't be our favorite or anything like that. It's not to suggest that, but the extents to which caregivers give and what effects that has, I think it's really careful to make sure that our faith isn't used as a justification for not taking care of ourselves.
Hmm. Yeah, very much so. I think that ties us back into the mundane. You had mentioned to me the last time we spoke that in your clinical work, the most dangerous signal isn't just depression. You said
Yes,
it was something else. What would that be?
hopelessness.
Yeah.
Hopelessness is poison. It is, the idea that not only am I in pain, but there's no end and there's nothing I can do about it. That's dangerous. That's a dangerous place for us to be as people. And the sometimes that can be caused by that can be the result of depression. It can be the result of these things, but we always have choices. It is so important for us to realize there are always choices. Now, we may make choices um, that are hard, or that are exhausting at times, for sure. We may make them, but they are there. And when we don't think there are choices, that means we're not allowing ourselves to consider different possibilities, and it may not be something that is desirable that, maybe fits our ideals or our wants or, these types of things, but they are choices. The reason why, Deborah, I think that's so important, let's use the example that I promised my wife, my husband, my mother, my father, my aunt, my whomever it is, I promised I would never put them in a nursing home.
Yeah.
I never would do that. I promised that. And as we're taking care of them, and as those demands build and build and build, and we're like, there's nothing I can do. I'm exhausted, and such. We have the choice to put them in the nursing home. We have that choice. And, sometimes those promises we made are made at times where we don't fully get what things are going to be like. And it's not ideal. We would love for that to be different.
Mm.
But sometimes we realize it's not tenable. It's not, it can't keep going. If I say that, no, that can never happen, well, then I can start to feel that hopelessness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Here's the thing, though. Let's say I choose, well, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. At least I recognize I made a choice.
Mhm.
And that doesn't mean I'm not exhausted and having difficulty, but I'm basing this off of a value system that at this point in time, I'm going to do this, but I still have that option. It's still available. It is certainly not hopeless.
Yeah, I think sometimes people need to be able to say, I did it as long as I could.
Yeah,
When they started hospital at home and asked me to change IVs and take care of all sorts of tech equipment, I just didn't feel comfortable around it anymore. I was
right.
afraid I'd make a mistake and so on. To recognize that some situations were not predictable years ago when we made those promises
Absolutely.
and circumstances might have changed. So if you're a relative of a family caregiver and you're concerned about that person, what are some of the earliest signs that they might need help? And what do you most want these relatives to hear?
Well, I think that we're looking for changes. We're looking for changes in behavior. And that doesn't just mean mood. It can mean isolating, oneself. It can mean the very things that I am so passionate about, is that they're not sleeping as much. You notice the dark circles under their eyes, less patience that they have. You notice weight changes, significant weight changes. Because as you said, I mean, I love what you said again earlier when you were talking about, sometimes food, that those comfort foods, those foods that when we're struggling with energy and our mood and things like that, sometimes that sugar burst.
Mhm.
is a thing. And we're going to do that sometimes. We just don't want it to become a habit. We don't want it to be the go-to. Have some grace. You're going to do it every once in a while. That's okay. But looking for these things, are there weight changes? Are there, um, sleep changes? As I said, are they isolating? All these things, we're just looking for these changes in people. And then we can do this crazy thing, which is ask
Who would have thought?
and ask and listen. And sometimes, I mean, listen, we're all people. And so, sometimes you know, I think if we're honest with ourselves, sometimes we don't ask because we recognize if we ask, then perhaps there will be things asked of us, or we will feel compelled to do it. And I mean, you know, we're, we're not all, I mean, we're not perfect. We have things, and I've been guilty of that with my sisters, is that, I didn't ask. I said the, wow, you all do so much, thing myself. I mean, guilty. And so I think that it is, yeah, but I think that checking in, and sometimes it takes being there. Sometimes it takes, being present, seeing the situation, and seeing the environment. Is the house just in complete, chaos and disrepair, and that's not normal for this person? And so, let's watch out for changes.
Yeah, it sounds like it comes right back to the Primal Five. If something is out of alignment there, that you notice, that's a good
Right.
time to ask about the sign that you're seeing. Yeah.
And to that point, to your point there, is it's these things, us taking care of these things, it goes both ways, right? I mean, so sometimes we're feeling bad and depleted
Mhm.
because we're not taking care of these things. And sometimes we're depleted, which leads us to not take care of these things. Maybe that emotion and that hurt has overwhelmed us, right? And now I'm not active. I'm not getting outside. I don't feel like reaching out to people. So, it goes, they feed each other.
Mhm.
And I think that my point of view is we live in a world where so many things that affect us are not in our control. And that's really hard.
Yeah.
So why don't we focus on the things that are in our control that have a major impact on us?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to look at it. Not trying to be superwoman or superman helping the caregiver either, and going beyond what humans can possibly do for one another.
Right,
But let's focus on what's right here, you know,
right,
things we can observe.
right.
So I've one more question for you, then I'm going to ask you to talk a bit about your own work and let us know where we can find it. But I'm wondering if you could change one cultural assumption about caregiving tomorrow. What would that be, and what would you replace it with?
If I could replace one caregiver, one assumption about caregivers, um, I would replace the assumption that the spouse, the loved one, the daughters are are the ones that need to do the work. And I think that those tend to be the norms. And I think that there's an assumption that that's what you do. That's what you need to do. And that needs, I think a lot of times there's this assumption that that's just everything. Everything that is required is what you need to do. Everything that person needs is what you need to do. And it's interesting. I've worked because of this, I've worked with some caregivers, and one of the things that I found is that there is this assumption, perhaps, and one per, it's like the spouse is supposed to give all the care, and one of the things that we had to work on was finding other caregivers or people who had previously been in that role
Mhm.
so that they could understand, so that person could say the things that are not, that many people can't understand, but are such natural things to feel,
Yeah.
such natural things to feel. We had to do that, but I do think that, there is this assumption that the spouse, the loved one, the daughter, I think often is going to be the one to step in and take care of it all. And I would really love for that to be replaced with a more communal approach, a recognition of what that may do to that person. And I mean, statistically, what we know is more likely than not going to happen to that person. And to have that more communal approach, and also for the caregiver to allow it.
Yeah, it's a two-way thing. But if we can spread the work out a bit more, then everybody could emerge feeling a lot stronger and healthier about their existence and
Right.
about the work that they did. Um, that what is that proverb? If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together.
Right.
So that might take a family a lot farther in terms of emotional resonance than having one person just wrap it all up and take care of it by themselves without any communal interaction. So those
Right.
two extremes might be something to look at. I love that reversal that you'd like to see.
Right.
Very much on the line of share giving. So thank you for that.
Certainly.
So at this point, could you share some resources for people or where they can get in touch with you, and particularly about your Primal Five and any website you want to mention?
Oh, absolutely. So we have a website that is Our Primal Five with the number five, ourprimal5.com. And so it has information on the workbook. It has a link to an Amazon link to be able to get the workbook. We have a newsletter on there, that gives periodically, will give some information, some, encouragement and a way to view things, and a way, because what we've tried to do with the workbook is that we want to let people know how much these things affect us. So we want to encourage that, but we also have in there a lot of approaches, behavior change approaches, because if it were as easy as bringing it up and say, hey, let's change this, then we would all be doing it.
Mhm.
But it's not. And so we're trying to, we try to encourage and give ideas on different things that we can do. Yeah, there's so many important things that can be roadblocks to doing these, and trying to be aware of those, set ourselves up for success. And so the website is a resource. Of course, it's on Amazon. Have a LinkedIn page if anybody would want to reach out to me there.
That's great. And we'll be putting all of this in the show notes for everyone. And I really appreciated our conversation today, Matt Campbell. This was a really dynamic interview, and I'm so glad that we were able to do it. So I'll give you the last word. Is there one other thing you'd like to leave our audience with this evening?
Be kind. Be kind to yourself. Recognize that you need that. Be kind to yourself in what you need. Be kind to yourself in the feelings that you have. Those are okay. Those are okay. We just want to help. We want to help ourselves and do the things that nourish us.
That's a beautiful sentiment to end on. I thank you once again, Matt, and I hope we will talk again sometime.
I would love that. Thanks for having me.
Bye now. Thank you. Thank you for joining me today on the Share Giving Secret. I love sharing insights and stories to empower you on your caregiving journey. If you like what you hear, you can dive deeper by picking up a copy of my pamphlet, Non-Negotiables for Caregivers. Go to my website, deborahgreenhut.com, and click on the link for Non-Negotiables for Caregivers. Until next time, keep sharing, keep caring, and remember, you're not alone on this journey. Thank you for listening.